Hey guys, welcome back to the game room. Let's jump right into it. Video game consoles. You love them, I love them, we all get a kick out of our favorite platforms and the games that they bring with them. But have you ever really sat back and thought of just how much pressure is on the actual hardware manufacturers when it comes to their first-party game content? Something that really isn't taken into consideration these days is the announcement of a new console maker. Google Stadia, which isn't even really a console, was the first piece of mainstream hardware tech to be announced from someone other than Nintendo, Sony, Sega, or Microsoft in years. Worse for the Stadia is that from a game standpoint, it's simply an extension of the PC market. New console makers, however, are few and far between in the public forum. The financial burdens that a company must take on to release a new console, from the very first idea put to paper to the first sale at retail, can run in the millions, if not billions. Setting up infrastructure, development and IT teams, programmers, artists, marketing, manufacturing plants, establishing partnerships with third-party developers, and retailers is an astronomical undertaking. And while how one goes about that can be debated till the PlayStation 30 comes out, there is one single factor above all else that will decide the console's fate. Games. To understand where we're going with this episode, sit back for a moment, close your eyes, and imagine you're at your favorite place to buy a video game console. I am your trusty and helpful retail associate, and I stand before you with a bright, shiny new box. After denying my extended warranty and offer of a discount card, the most important question arrives. What games would you like with your new system? If I had said Nintendo system, would Mario, Zelda, or Metroid be the first titles that came to mind? If I asked you about your new Sega console, would Sonic, Streets of Rage, and Virtua Fighter be your first thoughts? I'd be willing to bet at least two of the games that immediately jump to your mind were actually published by Nintendo and Sega, which brings us back to the original PlayStation. You can open your eyes now. In 1994, with the Japanese arrival of the PlayStation near and the US release less than a year away, Sony faced this very problem. How do you establish yourself when you have no foundation to go off of? The strategies taken differ based on your region, so for the sake of sanity and brevity, I'm only going to discuss the good old US of A's battle plan. The answer that Sony of America came to blossomed into a four-edged sword with which no enemy could defend against. To properly illustrate how each decision impacted the marketplace, I've sequenced these in order of importance, impact, and in one case, deviousness. Bear in mind that these don't take place in chronological order. Coming at the fourth spot is my personal favorite of all four tactics because it was a cunning move, a disaster or a blessing based on your priorities, but most importantly sent a message that spoke volumes. That move? Sony purchasing the American publishing rights to 3 specific SNK games in the middle of the American Saturn's darkest hour. With Nintendo more or less a non-contender to Sony, that left the Sega Saturn to rumble with, and if we're being brutally honest, Sega was killing the Saturn quite nicely on its own. With the American Saturn struggling to stay relevant without a true new Sonic the Hedgehog game, the Japanese side of Sega had found new life with the RAM and ROM cart releases from SNK and Capcom. SNK's near-arcade perfect ports of the King of Fighters 95 with its ROM cart and Samurai Showdown 3 with its RAM cart, teaming up alongside Capcom's 4-meg RAM cart Street Fighter games, created a digital heaven for gamers across the globe. Having worked in a family game store that sold imports at the time, I cannot tell you how many copies of X-Men vs. Street Fighter I sold alongside the production replay and a Saturn system for those that needed it. It was a rainfall of sales for the company. The import Saturn was thriving with the support it needed, buying Japanese developers enough time to get more quality titles out. But here in America, with gamers clearly flocking to the PlayStation, Capcom decided that the financial investment of bringing the RAM cart and games to America was not worth it, and instead released the EX editions of their games on the PlayStation. With SNK being the only real hope for American gamers, Sony quietly purchased the publishing rights to King of Fighters 95 and Samurai Showdown 3 for the Americas. A third game, Fatal Fury Real Bout, was also optioned and advertised, but never came to be. With the two main stars of SNK's cartridge revolution dealt with, Sony quietly picked off the Saturn's only true saving throw. Just how in demand were these conversions? The Saturn's box set for Street Fighter Alpha 3 alone can top $300 on eBay, while the other cartridge games will still command a respectable price tag all these years later. Representing the third edge of the blade is Sony's own in-house publishing choices. Learning new hardware and bringing fresh ideas to the masses can be a daunting task, but even if the games aren't perfect, they can be just what's needed. This is glaringly obvious in Sony's early launch days, where they had to satisfy 100,000 hungry system pre-orders. While their name would change over the years, the original American team was responsible for some of the most crucial decisions in the PlayStation's launch era. Which games to bring over from Japan, which games not to, what local-based games could make the system shine, and what genres were needed to feed the hungry customer base. While not all their choices were the best sellers, they provided the foothold Sony desperately needed from day one. Sony was responsible for publishing games like Philosoma, Kill the DNA Imperative, Ballerina Toshinden, ESPN Extreme Games, and so much more. As I said, they may not have all been blockbusters, but just from those 4 games, you had fighting, a first-person shooter, sports, and a spaceship shooter covered. As the years went on, that in-house publishing strategy would soon blossom to the most influential and monumental co-publishing catalogs in gaming history. Speaking of, sharpening the second edge of the sword brings us to Sony's most damaging attack, the publishing rights to some of the 32-bit generation's biggest blockbusters. It's here where the no-brainers are, the decisions that not only rocked the gaming world at the time, but solidified Sony's foreseeable future for a decade. The most obvious is, of course, Final Fantasy VII. For those younger gamers watching, before the PlayStation, then Squaresoft, was essentially a Nintendo-centric developer. The Final Fantasy series had produced 3 games on the original Nintendo, 3 on the Super Nintendo, and several on the original Game Boy. After a demonstration video of how Final Fantasy VI might look in 3D, most folks took it as a sign of a Nintendo 64 iteration. With the announcement of the cartridge format and Square getting heavy into CGI movies, when it was revealed that Sony would be exclusively publishing the console version of Final Fantasy VII, it sent shockwaves through the fandom and the industry. Not only was Nintendo losing one of their biggest contributors, it was losing a very cornerstone of the American role-playing game market. As more and more RPGs came to the CD-ROM format and leaving the cartridges behind, Nintendo's former president Hiroshi Yamauchi in 1999 made this eye-opening statement during an interview. People who play RPGs are depressed gamers who like to sit alone in their dark rooms and play slow games. We'll ignore those copies of Zelda, Illusion of Gaia, and Pokemon stacked up behind him. Needless to say, Sony's bold move had paid off in spades. It had literally ripped the fabric of the American gaming scene to shreds. Along with Final Fantasy VII, Sony also published the incredible Final Fantasy Tactics and cult favorite Bushido Blade under their watch. Along with the hardcore gamers covered, Sony found success in publishing various children's-focused games, with mascot characters like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon running alongside the Disney releases of Tarzan, Hercules, and more. Arcade junkies also had the ports of Bloody Roar to look forward to. Finally, and most importantly of the 4 edges, are Sony's masterful publishing deals with Namco and Signosis. Let's start with the obvious one in Namco. It's a deal that not only covered console games, but also arcade hardware. Namco's System 11 arcade boards were essentially PlayStations with ROM chips instead of CD-ROMs. While less powerful than Sega's AM2 arcade hardware in the arcades, it created one of the cheekiest and truthful claims Sony could make: near arcade perfect ports, a sentence that would send chills down Sega Saturn owners' spines as their beloved arcade games just didn't look quite right at home. Speaking of arcade games, it also opened up the floodgates for much of Namco's classic library, with the Namco Museum series giving gamers the chance to relive Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, Galaga, and more on the same system they were playing their modern arcade games on, like Soul Edge. With Sega leaving their classics to be released by Working Designs, it was just another nail in the coffin for Sega. If Namco was Sony's ace in the hole for arcade conversions and strategy, Signosis was their royal flush. Now, if you've never paid attention to your PlayStation game cases, here's where I get to shed a little bit of light on your collecting habits. Signosis struck a co-publishing deal with Sony where Signosis would publish some of their titles and Sony would take care of the rest. The catch being that many of the titles would bear Signosis' logo and not Sony's. If you're looking to subset collect all of Sony's first-party games, look for the SCUS designation on Signosis games. Those are the Sony first-party games hiding in plain sight. This partnership was crucial to Sony because they now had access to an endless well of second-tier level games that could support gamers while they waited for the next AAA title. These included Formula 1, Chronicles of the Sword, Destruction Derby, Lemmings, and so much more. So just what was the final result of these 4 edges of a single blade? A first-party library of over 200 games, from adventure, sports, and fighting to niche genres like boat racing, point-and-click, and concept games. To put that in perspective, the American Nintendo 64 had 296 games total, and the Saturn had just over 250. You could almost have the same size full set libraries with just Sony's releases on the PlayStation. That's how you support a system. Now, truth be told, 20 years later, you can still see the ramifications and just absolute shockwaves that this has. Like, it took years for Tekken to come to another system. It took years for certain third-party games published through Sony to come to other systems. Final Fantasy VII is only just now coming out on anything other than a PlayStation system. It's incredible. And that does it for the episode. As always, guys, I love you guys being here. Thank you for all the new subscribers and views, especially those coming over from the Angry Video Game Nerd Superman video. That was a bizarre instance, and I welcome all of you guys. Definitely check out the rest of the videos and GameRave.com with a hyphen. I will see you guys next episode. Have a great time. Take care.